Okay, let's keep going. So let's do another couple measures and then we'll jump back and do the chord functions. So here we have A sharp, C sharp, and then E, C sharp. Same thing again. So we only have 3 different notes here. So we can probably account for all 3. We have A sharp, C sharp, and E. What does that make? Well, it would make an A, C, E chord, except, so if it was an A, C, E, according to the key signature, it would be A, C sharp, E. So without this accidental, it would be an A major chord, which in our key of A major is 1, right? However, we have a little wrinkle that it's an A sharp, C sharp, E chord. Oh man, this is getting hard. This was such a hard one to pick. But I'm committed now, and so we're going to keep going. Okay, so A sharp, C sharp, E. So in the key of A, this is totally bonkers because this is a sharp 1, like a raised 1 chord. Because it's an A sharp diminished chord. So A sharp diminished. What on earth do we want to call that? Well, let's think about it. Okay, so the best way to analyze this is to think about it as a diminished chord. Okay, so let's call it question mark diminished. And we're going to solve this question mark right now. So it's a diminished chord. So where can our diminished chord happen? If we're in a major key, our diminished chord can only be a 7. So if this was a 7 diminished chord, that would mean that we're in the key of B major. Okay? Does that make a lot of sense? Not a lot. Just looking quickly at the next bar, I see a B and a D, so it could make sense that we're heading to B, but it's not a D sharp, so it's not major. So that doesn't work really well. Diminished chord can also appear as 2 in a minor key. So if A sharp was 2, we might call this in the key of G sharp minor, which is also super weird. This chord just doesn't really make any sense. But it kind of does, because what we can call it is a temporary just leading tone chord. So I'm just going to call it LT. We can figure out what we want to call it and give it a Roman numeral if we really wanted to, but this is functioning like a dominant chord leading to here. Listen to it. Right? It's treating this like tonic. So even though this is not B major, but it's B minor, we're kind of pushing it over to the B. So I'm just going to call this a leading tone chord, meaning this A sharp is functioning as the leading tone. We're treating this like a diminished 7 chord of this. Okay? We'll get more into how that works in the future. But the way you would actually write it is you would write that, and then you would write what that is. In our key of A, that's 2. So, and you'd have to write major 2. And then you would need one more piece of the puzzle here. You need a line like that. So you would say this chord is actually the 7 of the 2 chord. right? So here comes the 2 chord, and I'm doing a 7 of that 2 chord. That's the way you would notate that. These are called secondary dominants. We're making a dominant chord of not the dominant, but of something else. And doesn't have to be a dominant chord per se. It has to be a dominant functioning chord. So a 7 chord works. So let's leave it like that for now, just so that you've learned something new. You're learning a lot of new stuff in this analysis. So tough. This is weird. But I'm into it. We're just cruising along and just mastering all kinds of crazy things right now. Okay, so 5, 7 of 2. So this is probably a 2 chord, although it's minor. So we've gone deceptive on this a little bit because we prepared for a major 2, but we're giving ourselves a minor 2, or Bach gives us a minor 2. So B, D, there's another D, D, some C's, which we could count in there. D, B, D. So let's call this a minor 2 chord. Okay, and let's put that here as well. And that's a 2 chord in the key of A, which we are maybe still in, but let's think about this for just a second. If we're in the key of D, we're not, but what we're keeping our eye out for is a pivot chord. So if we were in the key of D, the 2 would be 6, right? Or this B would be 6. So that could be a pivot chord leading us back, but unlikely because there's no accidental. So we're going to just keep trucking for a minute here. What do we have now? So we've got a lot of this G-A happening. That means there's probably a 7th chord here. So C, G, A. If this was a 7th chord, it would be with A in the root. That would make sense with all the notes we have. A, C, we don't have an E, but that makes G the 7th. A, C, E. So an A 7th chord. Again, a bit of a tricky one to analyze because that is going to be in the key of A, a 1-7 chord. A, C, E, G. G natural, right? We're back to these G naturals. So we do actually have an accidental here and here. So I was wrong before when I said there's no accidental here. Technically, this has an accidental because we're in the key of A and this is a G natural. So that is not in key of A. This really looks like a pivot chord to me, but not back to D. Because when we see a 7th chord, we're going to expect a 5th relationship, right? So we have an A, C, E, G. Yeah, actually back to D. So this is probably leading us right back to D major is what's going to happen here. So let's grab that. Repeat it there. And we're going to call this for now, until we know what comes next, we're going to call this a 1-7 chord. Now that doesn't make a ton of sense, but we'll see if we get a D chord. D, F sharp, C. This would have been so easy if you just would have given us a straight up D major chord. We would have been back in D and everyone would have been happy. But what is this C natural doing here? Bach, you jerk. Okay, well, let's see what happens. D, F sharp, C, B, C. So we have that C a lot. So we're clearly on a D chord. D major, but with a 7th. So if we're back in D, we're at a a 1/7 again. So a 1/7 in the new key. That doesn't make a ton of sense either. So we can't call this a modulation necessarily because this is a modulation to something else probably. Let's do that thing again where we skip this chord and go here. Let's just see if we can figure out where it's going, and then that might give us a clue as to what to call that, and the one before it. So here we have D, G, B, A. Okay, so here we have pretty clearly a G major chord. Okay, so let's put those notes down. And then we have a D in the bass. So let's just do that for a minute. Okay, does this feel like tonic? Let's figure that out. Are we heading there? Could be. It could be that we're heading here, which is to G major, which is a lot like that E minor we were almost in for just a second back here, right? So if we're heading to G major, this A7 only serves to propel us to D, which then serves to propel us to A. This is a lot like that example I did earlier in this class where I said, here's a crazy key change, and I'm just going to keep inserting fifth related chords until I get to what I need to. This is exactly what's happening here. We're doing a sequence of fifth related chords getting us to the key that we want to get. We don't know if it stops there yet. So let's call this C natural, because that's what's happening here. So 1/7. We're still technically in the key of A, so this D would be 4/7, which then gets us to this G chord, which in the key of A is a 7. But this is a G natural chord, and in the key of A, we would expect a G sharp chord for our 7th. So we're probably not in the key of G. Or in the key of A anymore. So let's call this the key of G and a 1 chord. Now, let's step back. And let's call this key of G 5/7. I don't think we can step back any further to this one. Let's just leave that as a 1/7. What we should actually call this, if we want to go back to that secondary dominant thing we were just talking about, we should call this 5/7 of 5. And then we use one of these little lines like we did here. Same thing we did here. Except what we're saying here is that this is a 5/7 chord of the 5. So then that leads us to the 5. And then this is a 5/7 chord in the new key, which gets us to here. So it's just a cycle of fifth chords, fifth related chords, just like we did in the previous section, that gets us from A to the key of G. Cool, right? Man, this is a tricky one. Let's just finish this bar. So we're still in the key of G here. And we're still on a 1 chord. Okay, let's see how far we got here. We didn't get very far. We've got a lot more to go. But this section is getting super long. So let's take a little break and let's go and do our chord function. And then we'll see where we're at.